All right, so in this section, we're going to quickly talk about the redshift physical sun, or in C40, it's called the redshift sun and sky rig. So we'll go ahead and drop that into our scene. And the very first thing you're going to notice is that this looks extremely overexposed. This is actually pretty correct, and redshift actually suggests that you, in tandem with a redshift sun and sky rig, that you add a camera tag to your camera and enable the exposure mode. Now, in the case that you don't want to do that, there's also the option of simply lowering the intensity, or as well, you can use a non-physical intensity, and you won't be dealing with nearly as much overexposure. To check that off, and we'll go ahead and add the camera tag on and switch exposure on. It's important to note that this white that you're seeing is actually a 50% gray. So this is really, really bright. So now what we'd be able to do is stick our f-stop number up to 9. And we've got most of our details back in the scene. Now to control the orientation of this guy, if we want to rotate the sun around our scene, you click on the redshift sky and simply orbit the sun around. Alternatively, we can select the redshift sun and change its height in the sky as well. You see, as I bring the sun down, it actually responds pretty well in such a way that you would expect to see. When we're at kind of a noon position, super bright, very white. Our shadows are kind of a sky blue, as one might expect. And as we bring the sun lower and lower, it begins to look more evening-esque. Now, we do have a number of controls over this, so let's go ahead and take a look at what all these controls are. So if I click on Redshift Sky and click on the Sky tab, we have turbidity. So this is basically going to allow us to control how hazy our sky is. So if I flip this way up, for example, you'll see we get pretty Blade Runner looking, which is, not necessarily a complaint. Atmosphere ever looked like this, I think we'd probably be in trouble. So maybe let's bring turbidity back down. Ozone is an interesting one. More or less, you can think of this as how white or yellowish orange tungsten color the sun is. So if ozone is set up to 1, you can see we're a much less saturated orange color. And if I bring ozone all the way down to 0, we've got a very orange evening sun look. This also applies to when the sun is higher up in the sky as well. We bring ozone up. You can see it kind of just cools the whole thing off. By default, this is set to 0.35, so we'll leave that there for now. Now, horizon height and horizon blur are pretty interesting, actually, because they give you control over something that most other render engines do not, and that is actually the apparent height of our horizon. You may often run into an issue where you don't have geometry to compensate out to the horizon, and we can simply, in that case, walk the horizon down by a negative number. In this case, I entered -1, and that seemed to do it. If I enter -0.5, you'll see we get a little bit higher, and if we enter positive numbers, it'll start doing the opposite. All right, so let's flip that back to 0. Horizon blur is a pretty interesting one as well. It simply blurs the horizon line between the ground albedo and the sky. So that's a pretty interesting guy too. So now let's talk about ground color. I'm actually going to turn the plane off for a second. So in this case, ground is pretty clearly dark. We're not getting any bounces upward. If I were to bring my ground color up to white, you'll see that we're actually kind of illuminated from the bottom now. So this is simply describing what loosely the surrounding ground color should be. So I'm going to go ahead and flip my plane back on. And night color is a pretty interesting one as well. So if I flip night color to let's just do something dumb like green, you'll see that we're already actually getting some influence over the night color. As it is apparent during the day, it's kind of as the color of the sunlight scattering in the atmosphere starts to dissipate. What would otherwise turn to a dark blue into a black is now going to mix green in instead. You'll see if I flip night color back to black, then business as usual. This also holds true. Let's just flip it to a weirdo one again, like red. Also holds true for when our sun goes all the way down. You'll see that what would otherwise be black is now red. Let's turn that off. Color adjust is actually a pretty cool one too. So for this one, I'm just going to give us a nice little golden hour moment. Yoink. There we go. Actually, no. Let's leave it around here. So red blue shift. You'll see if I slide this over to the right, we get like really Blade Runner looking. It's pretty cool actually. And then if I slide it over to the left, we get this super weird blue color, which is really neat. Also because we can do like the Mad Max day for night look, right? And saturation is more or less as you would expect. If I bring this down to 0, our sun and sky rig goes completely black and white. Okay, so let's flip saturation back to 1. And let's jump over to the sun controls really quickly. All right, for sun disk intensity, it's actually pretty hard to see the results of this guy, as I've noticed. If I flip it down to 0, it doesn't really make a difference. If I flip it up to 10, it doesn't really make a difference. The time that it does make a difference is when sun glow intensity is set to 0. If we set sun disk intensity down to 0, we'll see it disappear. You'll see we've got sun disk scale, and this just has to do with how large the disk of the sun is on our apparent horizon. And then, of course, we've got the glow around the sun as well, which, you can use to dial a neat moment here graphically. This is going to be a pretty major deal for your reflections. So you'll see once I start to scale the sun disk intensity up, we really start seeing it appear in our reflections as well. If I go and flip our diffuse back up, set the weight to 0, you'll also see that with the sun disk scale, we get sharper and softer shadows as well. So a small sun disk scale equals sharper shadows, and a higher sun disk scale equals softer shadows. All right, well, thanks for checking out the Redshift Sun and Sky Rig section, and we'll see you in the next one.